Welcome back to part 2 of lecture number 7. We were talking about the effects of the scientific revolution. And as the world became demystified, we're starting to see that there will be less superstition of the natural world. We've seen witches being burned at the stake, for example. We've seen people believing in, ghosts and goblins and these sorts of things. That starts to subside as more and more scientific inquiry starts to be published and disseminated throughout the continent. What this will also mean is people will begin to question, where does God fit into all of this new knowledge? In other words, if the universe is governed by a series of equations, did God create those equations? Was this entity just a disinterested observer or an active participant in how the universe was run? All of these philosophical questions will be taken up by a newer generation of thinkers during the so-called Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment. There were those who came to believe, for instance, that the universe could be explained as a machine that functioned according to certain formulas. And those that took up this view leaned toward the philosophy of Deism. This was a faith based upon the idea that God's role in the ordered, rational universe was like that of a watchmaker. Having created the instrument, he then turned over its winding and management to humanity. Many felt that the discovery of the laws of gravity, motion, mathematical principles that explained how the planets moved showed that the universe was acting much like a machine or a watch. So for deists, theirs was a remote deity, one that was not involved in the day-to-day affairs of humanity. And the deists will be one part of what we come to call the Age of Reason. They will be part of the population of philosophers, or in French, the philosophes, that will begin to take up some pretty big questions about the world around us. So, for instance, you would rarely ask someone the following questions. You would kind of probably already know the answer that they would have to many of them, but do you believe in freedom of speech? Most people would say yes. Do you believe in freedom of religion? Again, most people would understand that to be yes. Do you believe slavery is wrong? Yes. Do you believe women should have equal rights? Of course, right? We sort of take these viewpoints for granted. But all of these were new questions that were posed during the Age of Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. This is a new generation of scholars that are beginning to challenge traditional forms of authority. So the Enlightenment was an intellectual movement that took place from the 1600s through about 1800 until the eve of the French Revolution. And although the center of this movement was France, it spread throughout the continent, to England, even to North America. And this newer generation of thinkers or philosophers, the term in French is philosophes, so you'll see me referring to that. They are coming of age after the scientific revolution, after their world is being demystified in a number of important ways. They're the ones left grappling with the implications of that and seeking to make some sense of it. At its core, the Enlightenment was concerned with the idea of reason. These philosophes were men who stressed that reason and logic should be the basis of all human thought and action. This instead of faith or superstition or blind acceptance of authority. So this will lead to a newer generation of thinkers questioning entities such as the Roman Catholic Church, questioning the idea of absolute monarchs or divine right kings. Specifically regarding political leaders, speakers of sedition or blasphemy will quickly find themselves imprisoned during the period or even killed. There was the bloodshed associated with ongoing warfare launched by these European kings, claiming that God had placed them in this position of authority. So philosophes began saying, really, is this the best that we can do? Is to listen to individuals, these bloodthirsty individuals that don't care about the welfare of their subjects. They don't care about the colonies, the people living in the colonies that they're taking over halfway across the globe. They questioned other forms of authority, the Roman Catholic Church, for example, which did not denounce human suffering in the form of slavery in the Americas as well as in Africa. And many of them will start to question, why are we okay with holding other human beings in bondage and treating them as animals? Instead of blind obedience, many philosophers of the Enlightenment instead urged people to use their intellect, to use their mind to decide on what was best, rather than just saying, well, this is the way we've always done it. The result of this was that during the Enlightenment, we see a renewed emphasis on learning and the use of human reason in a number of different areas of scholarly inquiry. One of the most important intellectual contributions of the Enlightenment was the Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia, that was published in 17 volumes between 1751 and 1765. Its editor and contributor, Denis Diderot, will be one of the most important of this newer generation of Enlightenment philosophers. Diderot had an innately curious mind, as you can see from the 1722 edition. He said, if there's something you know, communicate it, right? Let other people know. If there's something you don't know, search for it. He wrote a number of entries on philosophy, religion, political theory, and literature, and he was also highly critical of the Roman Catholic Church's influence on ideas. For this, we will see that the French government will attempt to censor the Encyclopedia. They don't want some of these so-called radical ideas coming out to the masses. The Roman Catholic Church also predictably placed the Encyclopedia on its list of prohibited books. Voltaire was another of the most influential and outspoken thinkers of the Enlightenment. He was a passionate deist, for example, who argued for a number of societal reforms. For instance, he believed in freedom of religion and argued passionately for that. He wrote extensively about the corruption of the French monarchy as well as the French government, and will even be exiled, forced into exile for several years, basically thrown out of France. He too was an extensive contributor to the Encyclopedia and a believer in reason, and a passionate defender for the rights of human beings. He argued for the abolition of torture and useless punishments, for example. Beyond writers such as Diderot and Voltaire, however, who were arguing largely for human rights in many of their passionate treatises, we'll also see other Enlightenment thinkers looking at the economy. Adam Smith, for instance, will be a Scottish economist and philosopher that is going to use some of the newer discoveries in the field of economics to develop a different way of understanding how economies work. Using a rationalist kind of reason-based argument in his most famous work, Inquiry into the Natures and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, he will reduce society to a machine in which the economy or the market functioned as if governed by an invisible hand. One of his main points was that if the free market, while it might appear to be chaotic and unrestrained, was actually guided to produce just the right amount and variety of goods by a so-called force known as an invisible hand. For example, if a product shortage occurs, its price rises because of scarcity, and it creates an incentive for people to produce more of it so that they can sell more of it, and that will eventually cure the shortage. He also argued that increased competition among manufacturers and increased supply would lower the price of a product to its production cost or its natural price, as he argued. Smith believed that while human motives were often selfish and greedy, the competition in the free market would tend to benefit society as a whole, and as such he advocated laissez-faire government. In other words, laissez-faire means hands off. He believed that government should not intervene in economic affairs or try to regulate markets. And so as a result, he was a proponent for economic freedom and no regulation. So when you think about the concept of capitalism, Adam Smith was one of the first voices that were kind of articulating this idea of a capitalist free market economy. Returning back to the issue of human rights, we'll see Mary Wollstonecraft will be an eloquent spokesperson for women's rights at a time when women had virtually none. Wollstonecraft was a curious soul by nature, but was frustrated by the fact that growing up in England as a woman during this period, during the 18th century, she was severely limited in her educational aspirations. No universities or schools of higher learning would allow female students at this time. So Wollstonecraft ended up having to basically educate herself over the years. In 1790, she wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Men, in which she presented her vision of a society based on equality of opportunity, in which talent, not the wrongful privileges of class, were the paths to success. Thomas Paine, also writing about human rights, and Wollstonecraft were accused in the press, though, of seeking to poison and inflame the minds of the lower class. That was certainly not their goal, but for Mary, she believed that just if you were born into the poorer classes, that should not stop you from being able to move up in society and gain an education. Wollstonecraft then decided to devote her next treatise to women's rights, a topic that had simply been ignored. The resulting A Vindication of the Rights of Women, published in 1792, featured her boldly declaring that all people, men, women, and children, had a right to an independent mind and had a right to education. She envisioned a society in which women could be educated and work alongside men as equals in every pursuit. She advocated equal citizenship for both sexes. And she wrote at length about her opposition to war and all other forms of oppression. So, in summary, the Enlightenment basically set many Western European societies on its much more modern, recognizable path. The work of these philosophers, which emphasized rational thought, secular thought, scientific inquiry, the ramifications of this are still with us today.